Hey, Brent, how's it going?
Good, good.
Awesome. Yes, we have Brent Dykes. He's the author of Effective Data Storytelling, which is a book that just recently came out. There's a lot of interest right now in data storytelling, and I think Brent's book may be among the best out there in terms of giving you a good blueprint for effective data storytelling. Brent, do you want to introduce your? There you go. Awesome. Do you want to introduce yourself to anybody who may not be familiar with you?
Yeah. So I've spent the last 15 plus years in the analytics space. I spent a good chunk of that time at Omniture slash Adobe. So I was there for about 12 years. And then I spent another 4 years at a company called Domo in the BI space. And then recently joined Blast Analytics. And so I'm a senior director of insights and data storytelling there.
Nice. And I think we also share another common employer, the University of Utah. We're both teachers at there.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. Yeah. I just finished a class on data visualization, data storytelling. And so that was my first time teaching there. So it was fun to kind of create a class from scratch, which is always a little bit of work to do, but it was
just a
fun.
bit. That's awesome. Glad you had fun with that. And to kind of bring it back full circle, like what got you interested in data storytelling?
Yeah. I come from a marketing background. That's my undergrad and my MBA. And I'd always kind of done really well with PowerPoint. I actually started up a blog. It's still open. I don't really post anything to it, but it's got like 100 articles. It's powerpointninja.com. So that kind of reflected the communication, the presentation side of you know working with businesses, and having worked in consulting in that time, I got a lot of exposure to presenting. But on the flip side, I also worked with data. And so, working in analytics and being exposed to that, I really saw a lot of people were struggling with how do I communicate the insights that I'm finding in the data? Even myself, sometimes it was challenging to kind of present the insights in the right way. And that's when I started to think about, hey, like how do we do this effectively? This whole concept of data storytelling was relatively new back in 2012, 2013. And so then I pitched to the Adobe marketing team, hey, I'd like to do a session on data storytelling, and kind of had to sell them on the idea, but they let me do it. And it was actually one of the most popular sessions at the conference that year. And then from there, I just kind of kept refining my ideas and presenting at other conferences. And then eventually when I left Adobe, I decided, okay, I want to write the book. Now I feel like, this, I was also kind of afraid because in some forums, I was starting to see data storytelling being treated more like a buzzword, where it was kind of empty and didn't really have a lot of meaning. And I was seeing it misrepresented in different ways. And I'm like, no, wait a second. There's a lot of power here. There's a lot of, this is something real. It's not just a gimmick. It's actually something that, we should learn to do, and should learn how to incorporate both the narrative and the visuals into our data communications.
So that's an interesting insight. I mean, I too had seen storytelling, data storytelling. Um, I think definitely reached buzzword status. I mean, what makes um, your version of storytelling different than the buzzword version, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of different ways that I've seen kind of the bastardization of the term data storytelling. One is just that data storytelling is just data visualization, that it's just if you get some pretty charts, and kind of it's just about, using data charts effectively. And it's much more than that, and the key thing there would be the narrative, really leveraging, what we've seen in storytelling for many millennia. Basically, there's some models and some different frameworks out there that I've then said, oh, hey, we can take these and use it to kind of convey our insights in a clear and meaningful way. The other kind of misinterpretation of data storytelling is, oh, okay, well, data storytelling is just some text or some annotations with the data visualizations. And sometimes we see that from technology vendors. They'll take, oh, we can put some descriptive text next to the visualization to help tell stories, assuming that just text means data stories. And really, I've kind of looked at it as, no, we've got to explain the insights. It's not just about describing the data, because often you'll see in different tools that different providers provide, they'll have a chart, and then they'll have a description of the chart. But that just describes the chart. It doesn't help us to get meaning from the data. It doesn't tell us why that thing spiked up. Yes, it went up 63%. Fantastic. I could probably see that from the chart, but now I have some text telling me that. Is that meaningful? Is that helping me to understand what drove that spike? And that's why I feel like human beings are still really needed to kind of help walk people through the numbers, walk people through the charts. And, it really is, in my mind, it's a combination of science and art, art and science, that we bring those two together to really build some interesting, compelling data stories. And then the other thing that I also focus on a lot is, if you think about an insight, what is an insight? Well, an insight is an unexpected shift in our understanding of something. It's something that surprises us, something that kind of moves it. Wait a sec, I didn't understand our customers that way. Or I didn't understand that business process that way. Or I didn't understand what was happening in the market. And so we take that insight, and then hopefully, in some cases we can act on an insight ourselves. And that's fine. We don't need to tell data stories for those. If I have an insight that I've spotted in my dashboard, hey, I can go, and say it's something related to our marketing campaigns, and I manage those marketing campaigns. Well, I can make the actions necessary based on that. But if I need to go to somebody else and explain to them, hey, we need to reduce our spend on this particular channel because I've found this and this and this, and then get their buy-in, get their support. Maybe there's resources I need to get. Maybe, I need to influence other people to make a decision. That's really, what we're introducing there is change. And so when we have these insights and we need to communicate them effectively to other people to drive change, I think that's important to recognize that, what we're doing with our analysis. And when we find an insight, if we can't communicate it effectively, we can't if we can't influence people to make a decision or change something within the organization, that insight goes nowhere and ultimately generates no value.
That's a great point. And in your book, you talk about communication. Don't just inform, right? I guess, how often do you see the role of data literacy playing into people being able to make better informed decisions and also better present data?
Yeah, it's on both sides, right? On the presenter side, the person that's, if you're not data literate, how are you going to find these insights? Or maybe you'll misinterpret the insights. So, as a person sharing insights or telling data stories, you have to have a basic level of data literacy. Now, on the receiving end, the audience side, that could be a challenge, and as the data storyteller, we have to really appreciate or understand the level of data literacy of our audience. If I'm presenting something to a bunch of other data scientists or analysts, people who really know the topic that I'm presenting on, that's going to be a very different approach than if I'm presenting to a business executive who maybe isn't as data literate, and I have to kind of walk them through the numbers a little bit more. I have to be careful about the jargon that I'm using. I have to maybe remove some of the noise from the data, the details that get in the way. But that also doesn't give us an excuse. Like, even if we know our audience is really data literate, that still doesn't mean that I can't, or that I shouldn't go in and clean up my visuals, really make them tight and streamlined so that, even if I am communicating to other data literate people, that I'm not still losing them in the minutia of information that, I could mistakenly assume, oh, hey, that's one of the challenges. We think that what works for us and communicated to us when we were doing our exploratory analysis will equally communicate well to other people. And that's one of the main problems I've seen, especially with analytics and data scientists. We think, oh, hey, this is so clear to us. It makes total sense to us. We assume that other people can equally see what we see in the numbers. And that's often not the case because they haven't spent days, weeks in the data like we have. They may not have the full context like we do. And so, yeah, they can't see what we see in the numbers.
Yeah. And so what are are there key things that people who are really deep in the data need to consider and convey when they're talking to executives who may not be as in the weeds as these data professionals?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of self-evaluation that we have to do. One of the things is curse of knowledge. You may have heard of that.
Yep.
We have that curse. It's hard for us to not, to not know what we know. And so we have to kind of be very diligent and think about, okay, if I were in their shoes, would I be able to interpret these numbers the same way? Would I understand the definitions behind these numbers? Would I understand where these numbers came from, what they mean? And so it's really about, looking at it from, it's empathy. It really comes down to empathy for the audience and thinking about how can I make things easier for them to understand? And there's so many different strategies that we can apply. It could be removing data that's not necessary. When we're doing an exploratory analysis, we're pulling in all kinds of data and using a very large data set to kind of find these insights in the data. But then when it goes to the communication or the explanatory approach of data storytelling, we may not need the full data set. We may not need to include all of the data points. In fact, it could be overwhelming for a business executive who's like, wait a second, why do you have, it might be the time frame we're using. It could be the number of series that we're including in the data set. It could be anything that's just, there's I like to call it editing that we need to do. Like I'm a big fan of movies and love to, see the theatrical versions. And then sometimes I think, oh, it'd be so cool to see the director's cut of this, because I bet there's some really cool scenes and extra footage and stuff. And sometimes that's the case, but in most of the time, what I've found is that there's lots of these really dumb extra scenes, and I'm like, I don't like, you look at the finished product and you say, actually, that was the better version. The theatrical version was better than the director's cut. And unfortunately, in the case of our data storytelling, sometimes we're like that director who can't cut certain parts of our data story because, oh, I spent days looking at that number. I got to show that, or oh, look at the full spectrum of things I looked at. It's so impressive. And at the end of the day, it's like, well, okay, I just want to be able to act on this. I want to make a decision, and some of that stuff can just be noise.
Yeah, I mean, another buzzword in the tech and data space is the word agile. Do you recommend that data teams work in an agile fashion alongside stakeholders as they're developing the reports and exploring their data, or do you recommend maybe doing the exploratory data analysis and then providing your insights to the executive after you've developed some key insights?
Yeah, I mean, I if we look at it kind of on an iterative process, right? If we're doing it in an iterative manner, I think there could be good insights, because, if you're doing it just kind of going with a long build up towards you're not sharing anything until this big reveal, I don't know, maybe sometimes that may not be, unless you have a really good understanding of the challenge or the problem. I really do think that it's kind of like maybe shorter sprints or iterative approaches can be more effective, because you're having these checkpoints. Hey, am I on the right track? Hey, is this meaningful? Am I going in the right direction? Yes, no. Okay, let's reevaluate, And so I do think that maybe a more agile or iterative approach could be effective with data analysis and then with storytelling as well.
Yeah, and then, I mean, you talk about empathy, and one thing that comes to mind is when you're coming up with your data story, like how much of that story arc kind of needs to fit into the story arc of the business itself, right? I mean, do you sometimes find that maybe teams may come up with stories that differ from maybe an exec's version of the story?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I talk about, so there's like 3 pillars of data storytelling that I mentioned in my book. And so one of them is data, which is the foundation of everything, right? If we don't have that foundation, we don't really have a data story. The other one is narrative. and then the third one is the visuals. Now, if we look at the data, what I really try to do is have people think about it. Okay, let's think of in terms of your audience. And I introduce a framework called 4D. And there's 4 dimensions that I found would be helpful to understand about the audience to make sure that my data story hits the mark. Essentially, that I find an insight that's going to be really meaningful to my audience. And so the 4 things that I want to focus on is A, do I understand what problems my audience is facing? So if I'm trying to do, say something for a CMO, do I understand what challenges they're facing, that she's facing in the business? Maybe they're not generating enough leads, and the sales team is complaining they're not getting enough leads from their marketing efforts. Okay, so now I start to understand that problem, and then I also want to understand the next D would be, what are the outcomes that she's trying to drive? Well, she has a goal this year to double the number of leads that her team is generating for the sales team. Oh, okay. So now I have a target. I have a kind of an appreciation of where, what's going to be informing a lot of the actions and focus and priorities that she's going to have during the year. And then the third D that I look at are the actions or the activities that she's doing. And so, in a marketing use case, it might be, well, they're going to, in a post-COVID world, they're going to be looking at more virtual events and doing more promotion that way instead of their traditional, event-based kind of marketing. And maybe they're look at doing deeper investments into social media or whatever. And so now, all of a sudden, I know what problems she's trying to address. I know what targets she has. I know what priorities or initiatives that they have. And so I can start to target my analysis. And the fourth D is the measurements or the key metrics that she's going to be looking at. So that might be cost per lead. That might be number of leads. That could be, we get into sales qualified leads and, marketing sales accepted leads and marketing qualified leads, anyways, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So these are the metrics so now, often what I kind of feel like is as we go into the data, we start guessing what would be important to them. But if we really have an understanding of the audience using these 4 dimensions, we're not going to get lost in the data. We're not going to lose ourselves. We're not going to go off track. We're not going to build this big data story that ultimately misses the mark and doesn't really, it isn't relevant, isn't impactful to the CMO in this case. If we truly understand these 4 dimensions, we're going to deliver, or we're going to be put into a position where we can deliver really good insights and data stories to her team.
Mm-hmm. And who owns the narrative of the data story? Is it the analyst or the data team who's presenting it? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges sometimes I see is that people create the narrative before they've done the data work, right? So they say, this is the story I want to tell, and so let's go cherry pick some data to kind of support that story. That's not, in my mind, that's not a real data story. And so I feel like the narrative is obviously informed by, the audience and understanding who the audience is. And, in the book, I talk about how, if you think of the example of Robin Hood, and how many different variations of movies, we have of Robin Hood, and they're told to very different audiences. You have the Russell Crowe version, you have the Kevin Costner one, you have the Disney one. They're all appealing to very different audiences. And so the audience does influence the narrative in the sense of, what we choose to focus on, how we tell it. But ultimately, I look at the analytics team as being the ones who kind of add, pick and choose what elements go into the story, right? So I find that the narrative is useful for many purposes. It's helpful for us to kind of lead the audience through the key points that we're trying to make. It's also useful to us as we create the story, because all of a sudden we can say, okay, if there's certain things that we need to have in our data story, that means we can say, okay, here's an insight or an observation that ties into this. Okay, and we start mapping things, and then we have a bunch of other data points that are left over. Now that's information that we don't want to put into our story, that typically would go into, well, probably be more of a data dump, in the sense that we just pile it all in, here's everything we found, hopefully, it's kind of like shotgun approach where we just, I hope that works. Maybe they'll find something of value of interest, from this pile of information. But the structure of a data story and the narrative will actually help us to see, what, this data point here is not relevant. I'm going to take that out, or this is duplicative, or this is redundant, or this is too in the weeds, and so you put it into the appendix, you put it into the back of the presentation in case somebody asks a question. But it helps us to not only convey the information, but it also helps us in the building of the data story to make sure that we remove information that's not really critical to conveying our message.
Right. This is interesting. You bring up the example of movies, and it got me wondering. Everyone kind of sees when they see a good story. I think they can resonate with it, right?
Right.
But what are your thoughts on, as data storytelling starts to become more, I would say, widespread in organizations? Are there other areas of the business that could benefit from, I guess, gaining a better understanding of proper storytelling techniques? I'm thinking maybe sales, marketing, execs, because it seems as there's kind of a convergence of two things. There's data storytelling, I think people are going to see how awesome that is, and then there's also just more data, both used internally and externally. So,
yeah,
your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think of every function as getting more access to more data, right? So we talk about the data democratization. We have self-service analytics. We have it so that, it's not just the analytics team, it's not just the data teams that have access to data. It is the salespeople, it is the marketers, the HR, operations, all of these teams, call center, everybody's getting access to data. And if they have insights that need to be shared with other people on their teams or other departments, or internally in some manner, maybe even externally with customers or whatever, if we have this information, then they're going to need to be able to fashion it into data stories so it can really communicate effectively, especially if they're trying to really highlight key insights that they want people to understand and make decisions on. So I think it is a skill set that's not just going to be limited to the data teams. I published an article on Forbes that talked about, that it's really an essential skill for everybody. It's one of those data science skills that everybody should learn. Now, obviously, the data teams should definitely become masters in it, because we work the most with data on a regular basis. But I would say today, as we look at all kind of teams, every team, there's not one business team that you could say isn't getting exposed to more data, doesn't have more data at their fingertips, and then should be able to, obviously need to be data literate, but then also understand how to communicate those insights effectively with other people within their organizations or externally as well.
Yeah, agreed. Let's hope your class becomes a required class at the U, for example. That'd be awesome. So that's interesting. And coupled with the rise of data, you're also seeing the rise of artificial intelligence right now. And how do you reconcile this world where you have, on one hand, more computer-generated insights versus, on the other hand, more data and a need for better storytelling around that data?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I see AI and machine learning and all these tools as help us as data storytellers to find insights more easily and more quickly. I think that's a key area where the data science, with the artificial intelligence, can really help us to spot these anomalies. And I've had some exposure through different vendors to anomaly detection and different things like that, and it can be really great. But often, what it doesn't do, and this might be the next level, would be help me to understand what caused or contributed to that anomaly. And I think there's still some room to be done there. But I see that as, that's where the technology can really help us. And then I've seen, obviously, with natural language generation and different vendors incorporating that, kind of like what I was saying earlier, I think a lot of the focus has been on describing the data and describing the information in the chart. But again, what we really need, and I think this is where the storytelling is really powerful, is when we explain the how and the why, not just the what, when, where. And so right now I think that the technology is doing a better and better job of describing the data, but I don't see that as storytelling. And not until we can get into the why and the how of what's happening and helping to be explanatory. And I'm not saying that technology can't get there, but some of the obstacles that it'll have to overcome is how do they connect different data points across data sets and start to weigh, which ones, get heavier weighting than others. Because the challenge that can happen is, and I've seen this with AI, is that it can flag a lot of what it feels like are important observations that to an expert would say, no, that's not important. No, that's not important. And then you get the fatigue, you get the, kind of like the overload of, so there's got to be a feedback mechanism in it. And then how do you, get it to learn properly and really suggest meaningful connections in the data. And then the other challenge that AI is going to have is how is it going to know the audience, and how is it going to learn the audience? And there's different audiences for this data and these different data stories. And I could have one insight, but I might need to tell it very differently to the IT team than how I can communicate it to the marketing team. Same insight, but it requires a different approach for both audiences, because that's the audience actually does impact the narrative. It does impact how we deliver the insight. So, I think I foresee technology enabling and contributing to data storytelling in the future, but I still feel like it's going to be a while before the technology can replace a lot of what we do as human beings, and especially for if we're talking about what I feel is really truly data storytelling and not just information. I think the AI can provide lots of information, but when we get down to insights, and as I defined, it's that unexpected shift in our understanding, and those are the things. Those are the gems. Those are the treasure of analytics. And how can AI really go full circle or full cycle on those? I'm not sure. I think they can. I think the technology can contribute.
Yeah, it's an interesting feedback loop, right? Because on one hand, the AI is going to provide, as you say, the information. It might provide because it's only going to provide what it's been trained to provide, though.
Right. Yeah.
Like I was in a discussion the other day with this guy who wrote some of the algorithms for Twitter for the feed, and it was an interesting discussion because he brought up the point. Well, we only incentivize the algorithm to respond off of engagement, so that's replies or likes, right? And so his thing was, well, people that may not like tweets of a certain president keep seeing those tweets, and they're seeing them because they reply to the tweet, but they're upset. So the AI has no context of like whether this person likes it or not. They're just responding. The AI is just saying, well, you replied, so I'm going to keep showing you more of this. So, and it's an interesting feedback loop, because in most businesses, like AI is trying to solve for some objective function, right? And at the end of the day, I think one of the concerns is that you run a risk of having like kind of this homogenous outcome in your business, and so you might miss things out of left field, which is might be to your detriment, right? So that's an interesting one. And on that note, I would ask too, with the data scientists, as even machine learning is becoming more automated now, and the role of a data scientist is changing. Do you think that the role of a data scientist may start becoming more of the role of a data storyteller?
Well, there's you read all those reports that say, I'm not really a data scientist, I'm a data janitor, where 80 to 90% of what data scientists do is often just, collecting the right data, cleaning it up, getting it to a usable state. And only 10 or 20% of the time are they actually doing any analysis or actually communicating the results of their analysis. So the more that technology can take over those janitorial services aspects of being a data scientist, I think that's when then we'll start to see, data scientists play more of a role and have to do more data storytelling. So I think, it's interesting. I've been hearing that for the last 3 or 4 years now about, and every time I check in with different data scientists, nope, still doing a lot of just the cleanup work and the processing the data, getting it to a usable state. And, but I have also been seeing more technology out there that seems to be targeted at how do we assist in the ETL process? How do we make sure that the data is good quality? And, and so I think over time that should get reduced. And then that would free up the data scientists to do more of this kind of strategic kind of work around, data storytelling.
Mm-hmm. I guess what are some things you envision for data storytelling over the next 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely technology will make more and more inroads. So definitely, hopefully it frees us up to have more time to do data storytelling, and it augments us in terms of maybe it helps us to find insights quicker, maybe even draw these connections quicker. I mean, obviously we're dealing with larger and larger data sets. So our human ability to kind of process information is going to be more and more limited in terms of, it's easy with maybe a single spreadsheet with a limited number of numbers, but when you're talking, millions of rows, trillions of rows of data, it's going to be hard for us to process that information, find insights without the help of computers and machines. So definitely, I think technology is going to come more in. I would hope as we become more data literate as a society, and as one of the things that I found that when I was looking into data literacy is we have a huge problem with education, in the sense that the pinnacle, and there's YouTube talks out there. I forget the name. I think it's Ben Anderson. I think his name. He's an educator from California, and he talked about how our education system is really geared towards, STEM, which is great, right? But what's the top of STEM? The top of STEM is calculus, which is basically gears you towards being an engineer. And really, and so all people that go through, high school education are encouraged to take, that math and different mathematics that are geared towards writing the calculus, during the, before they go into college and getting qualified into that. Whereas statistics, which is actually something that everybody would benefit from, is still not regarded as the pinnacle of this. And in a data, instead of an analog world that we used to live in, we now live in a digital world. And so, really the education system should be looking more at statistics and making that as, what we really need to teach people coming out of high school so that they're prepared for our digital world today. And that's not the case, but hopefully, in time. So I'm hoping in the next 5 to 10 years that becomes more of a focus.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I mean, I have a math background and I've studied lots of stats, lots of calc, and the amount of calc I use on a daily basis is practically none. The amount of stats I use on a daily basis is like a lot. So totally agree with that. And on the note of education too, I mean, where do you see the role of prose, like writing, being able to form a narrative and critically think through things? I mean, do you see this as being something that might be, injected more into curriculum as well?
I mean, I would like to see more critical thinking classes offered, more of that kind of training. I think that's invaluable. I remember my first critical thinking class that I took in college, I did not take seriously, and I had a long commute to the university. And so I didn't really stick around to really understand it. And I got my worst grade in university in that class, and I had to retake it. And then I got an A. But it was invaluable, like just thinking through logically, how to process information. I think that is another skill that should go hand in hand with statistics. And, I think they are kind of closely related. But yeah, I think writing and communication in general, and understanding how to share ideas and information in a clear, concise manner, I think is really important. And I think that education can do a better job on that front, to kind of help us communicate better. The only reason why maybe I communicate well is because I've put myself into a position where I've had to present a lot. I've written a lot of articles. I write for Forbes. I write I've written hundreds of blogs, and it's only through practice. And you talk to a lot of people today, and they don't practice, a lot of writing, and so that's why, maybe sometimes, that's a contributing factor to why insights go nowhere, because they're just not communicated in an effective manner.
It's an interesting point. You brought up your earlier PowerPoint. I think the site you have with all the PowerPoints, and that made me think too of Amazon's approach to how they run their meetings, and when you
Right.
need to express a new idea, they have the infamous 6-pager that you have to write. So
Yeah.
it's all prose, long form.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing with that exercise is it really does force you to think through your idea and communicate it very effectively. I've actually started doing this with my co-founder too. Any big idea that we need to consider, no PowerPoint, write it out. Because by writing it out, it forces you to think through things. And I want to get your take on this too. I mean, how often have you seen people just sort of PowerPoint, I think, has kind of a mixed reputation. On one hand, it might be effective. On the other hand, you can definitely hide behind PowerPoint.
Yep.
What are some, if somebody's going to use PowerPoint, like what are some of the better practices around PowerPoint?
Yeah, I'm hugely visual focused. So when you see me presenting, you're going to see a lot of imagery and pictures and diagrams, and I really try and pull back on the text. Right, one of the basic problems you'll see, and it's sad because I go to technology conferences, and I'll be presenting at one of these conferences, and I'll poke my head into another person's session or breakout session, and I'll see this slide, packed with this architecture diagrams and and lots of text, like the 6-point font, and you're just like, oh my gosh, like I am just amazed at how poorly people communicate their ideas and their information. And so PowerPoint, whenever you're reading your slides, you're using it as a crutch. Like you don't know your content well enough where you can't not read the slides, you've got a problem. And so what I always try to do is, I'll write my talk track. If I'm doing a big presentation, I'll write out what I'm going to say in the notes. It's not on the slide itself. It'll be in the bottom there, and I'll rehearse it a lot. I'll rehearse it multiple times to the point where I don't have to look at the notes. I don't need the presenter notes to present my presentation. I can do it cold because I've rehearsed it so much. And and also practicing with other people. Like it's so valuable when you can go to, before you present your presentation, walk through with a colleague, walk through with your wife, your husband, or whatever, and just say, what made sense, what didn't make sense. And it's amazing how, because you're so invested in creating the slides and the presentation that you miss things that are obvious to people that would have been in your audience if you hadn't corrected it. But your coworkers or your family members or your friends can easily spot it. So, those would be some of the things. I would go with a more visual approach. I'd reduce the text, and I would get feedback before you present, an important presentation. And I think those are, if you can do those three things, you'll be far ahead of where most presentations kind of fail.
Yeah, it's definitely a mixed bag. It's interesting on LinkedIn, where you and I frequent quite a bit. What's interesting is data scientists will ask for advice on what they can do to improve, right? And so there's always the discussion of, well, you should obviously be good at the technical stuff, but more and more, I think what we're seeing too is the emphasis on communication skills.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I know recently this actually ends up being usually the most I would say, widely given piece of advice to data scientists. I'm not sure if you have any advice for people who on how they can improve their communication skills or anything
Yeah.
related to that.
Yeah, it depends on, whether we're sanding off rough edges or if we're like
Right.
completely, breaking something. It's interesting. So some tips that I've seen from technical people that maybe struggled with communication. Two tips. One would be join Toastmasters, right? So there's an opportunity where you get almost a support network to kind of walk through and I've never actually been a part of Toastmasters, but I've heard good things about it, that it gives you an opportunity to kind of practice your public speaking, getting over your nervousness, getting more concise around how you communicate. The other one that I found was this is a less commonly used, but very effective. I was very impressed by a couple of people who took this route, but they picked up improv. So if you think
Oh,
of, like improv, so they
yeah.
joined improv classes and kind of went through that, and it completely transformed their confidence, their ability to think on their feet, to communicate effectively. So that's another kind of off the beaten path kind of tip that I would have. And then third would be just, there's lots of TED Talks, there's lots of books, there's lots of resources out there that you can immerse yourself in to kind of learn some of these things that can help you to communicate your ideas more clearly. And then the fourth thing would be just practice. If you can practice writing, if you can practice your presentations, if you can practice, the more you actually do this, the better you're going to get. Just, each time you're going to learn something, you're going to improve, and especially if you're asking people for feedback, they can tell you, the all caps kind of like all your text in all caps does, it feels like you're yelling at us. So could we, you get little tips like that can help you to better communicate your ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree on that. Like, I think you and I, we've done a lot of presentations, done a lot of interviews and such that for us, it's like we could walk into a situation pretty cold and probably do just fine. But I know that I remember when I first started. I mean, I think my first public speaking was I was in debate in high school, and that was scary at first. Getting up there and having to argue with somebody. And then after I think about a month in, it was just like, just get up there,
Yeah.
out of bed and just go through fine. So it just takes practice is all.
Yeah. I when I was in college, I worked for Microsoft, and I had to do like a presentation on Y2K.
Oh, wow.
That was a while ago. And it was like 500 people or something like that. Here I am, like a college student, just as an intern at Microsoft, having to present like I'm an expert on Y2K. And so, just
Boy.
through all these experiences, you quickly learn on your feet. And there's, I remember one time again, when I was at Microsoft, I was on a panel, and then, the scores from the panel came back, and somebody just lit me up. Just was cruel. Like, it wasn't even like constructive. It was cruel,
Oh boy.
and, and you get these kind of gut punches and stuff, and you kind of learn and you try and improve, and, it's you're going to have some face plants, but you just pick yourself up again and keep trying. And, and like it feels like, you're comfortable. I'm comfortable with public speaking now. And it's just, through this process of regularly, putting ourselves out there and getting in front of people and talking, and then, even introverts can, be effective presenters.
Yeah, I know from 'cause I run several meetups, and that's an interesting exercise because you get a lot of well-skilled technicians, for example, engineers, data scientists, or whatever. And then and I've seen people come out of their shells, people who were highly introverted, very quiet, would sit at the back of the room. I think they're just uncomfortable to be there, frankly. And then kind of coaxed them into giving a talk, and that they broke through their shell and a much different person now. And I think that confidence, it comes across in every aspect of their career and probably life as well. And it's very cool to see that. I mean, just remember, like your audience is probably as scared to ask you a question as you are giving your talk, unless they want to criticize you behind the scenes, like they give you talking points. But just Public speaking
Yeah.
is scary. I think most people would rather get hit by a bus than, talk in public. It's
Yeah.
funny.
It's funny because like I went on to present at like Adobe Summit, and that was like 5,000 people. And you're on the main stage there, and then they get these bright lights that shine in your face. And the funny thing is with these bright lights shining in your face, you can't see beyond like the
Hmm.
first 10 rows. So even though there's 100 rows behind that, you can only see the first 10 rows. So, you know, I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know. You just gotta. Here's another tip that I have when I'm presenting. When I first started my career, and especially at Microsoft, they'd have these prepackaged kind of slides, and an expert had gone through, probably presented this somewhere else, and then they share them, and you have all their notes, and so you memorize the scripts, and then you present it as your own. Okay, so
Hmm.
that's what I would do when I first started. But what I found is sometimes, I wasn't really connected with the content. I wasn't really connected with the presentation, and I feel like that was suboptimal. And so what I did later on in my career is I always tried to inject my personality into my presentations. I like to have fun with my
Yeah.
presentations. I'm a little bit geeky. I'm going to have some strange references. I'm going to make fun of myself, and so for me, that gets me kind of excited about presenting. That gets me, energized, and I'm having a good time presenting the content. So I would encourage anybody who struggles with presenting content, maybe don't take the default, doubt the default, question the default, put in your own personality, make it fun, have fun with the presentation, as much as you can. Obviously, you don't want to be unprofessional, but I think you can tailor the content to your personality and who you are. And then all of a sudden, it becomes less of a chore to kind of present the content, because you've had some fun with it. You've had some, you've injected your personal story or an analogy or something that makes that presentation you. And so I think that would be a tip that I would have for people.
Yeah, that's a big part of storytelling too, is I mean, you could copy a Stephen King book, right? And just plagiarize it and call it your own. But for you to try and write that, I mean, that comes from him, not you. And I think
Yeah.
that's a really big piece of advice, for anybody, because it's interesting. Like, storytelling definitely it definitely borders on art. I would argue that it is actually.
Yeah.
And the best presentations I've seen are the ones where the person is just themselves and they know what they're talking about. They're confident, and and they got their quirks, but that's what makes them them, right? If you
Yeah.
wanted, if you wanted the kind of automaton version of that person, then I don't know. I mean, you could just have somebody else read their presentation, for example. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've got a bunch of music equipment back here. I used to DJ for a long, long time in clubs and that kind of thing. And I think that, when you mentioned the lights in front of you, that reminded me a lot of that, where it's crowd size at the end of the day, it's kind of like, it doesn't matter. You just got to get up there and do your thing and
Yeah.
block it out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Totally.
yeah, that's awesome. I guess, kind of looping back to, the progression of data storytelling over the next 5 to 10 years, like, what are some obstacles that you see that could get in the way of storytelling gaining more traction?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, data literacy is a huge thing. If we can tailor our insights down to a base level of data literacy, but if there's just a complete lack of data literacy, that's really hard for people to kind of appreciate and understand what we're teaching. So, and then I think that would also, if people lack the data literacy, they're not going to have they're not going to find insights. They're not going to be data storytellers themselves. So I think those could be roadblocks. I think some of the tools we have today, we're fighting the tools. I don't think they're really designed to really empower us to be data storytellers as best as we could. And so I think that's another roadblock. I think, we've seen an assault on data and facts over the past 4 years. And I think that's challenging as well. If we want to have a fact-based, data-driven organization, and the culture or the people start, saying conspiracy theories or questioning the data, I think it's okay to question data, but the pursuit should be finding the truth, finding the facts, finding the what's important, and not just like, oh, I have a narrative that I need to drive, and this fact doesn't fit it. So that fact is crap. That fact needs to go away. But no, the fact is still there. It's still,
Right.
So I don't know. Culturally, I think, it's interesting. I think we were making so much progress towards becoming more data-driven as a society, and I feel like we've taken 2 steps back.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like I was going to ask you about, you kind of answered it with the data literacy part, right? I mean, again, there was a movement towards, I guess, numeracy,
Mhm.
but I would say over the past several years, there's almost an alternate reality, right? And so, like, how do you talk about facts? How do you talk about data when that's a quasi subjective thing now, right?
Mhm.
Underlying everything are facts. Facts are the facts. But again, um, if you kind of just take them as your own and do what you want, like that could be an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's lots of good books out there, like Alberto Caro's book that he just recently published, kind of, what is it? I'm trying to remember the name of it now. It'll come to me after we've finished done
Sure.
speaking. But really about maybe educating people on, how people can distort data, how we can use data the appropriate way. And when I was researching my book, and I actually found that there's some research that was done that showed that data storytelling or data visualizations can actually be a great way to actually compel people to kind of see things in a new light. And the storytelling is also a way to connect with people. Like if we just stuck with the facts and the data, and we just shove it in somebody's face and say, there you are, they have their own worldview. They have these own perceptions, and they're not going to be open-minded. They're going to resist. They're going to throw up their defenses, and they're going to, and even some researchers found that there's something called a backfire effect, where you could come with really compelling data, and you put it in somebody's face who doesn't believe that, and it'll actually reinforce their position. So they'll
Yeah.
actually be even stronger, like, no, the earth is
Yeah.
flat. There's no way you can convince me it's not flat, And so they hunker down in their positions. And some of the research that they found is when actually the information could be visualized and people could see it, like they could actually see the differences with a visual, it actually helped people to kind of see things in a new light. And then from a story perspective, if you have a narrative as part of your approach, they've actually seen people it's called like narrative transportation, where people are actually, they lower their guard. They don't nitpick on the details. They're actually more open-minded to new ideas. And they actually, the psychologists and people doing this research found that people almost entered into almost like a hypno, like a, they're hypnotized by the where the story was taking them. And so it opens opportunities, and so if we combine the narrative and the visuals, I think it may be one of the only ways in which we can really reach people that may have very different opinions from us. Now, there's no guarantee. It's, and I've even seen it with some people where I've talked to them and I've shared data, and they'll admit, okay, yeah, you're right, but I still don't believe it. I'm like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Like, data doesn't even matter. Facts don't even matter. So it's frustrating, because you're like, how do we help these people to see things in a new light? How do we see them, help them to realize that in many cases, they're being deceived, or, they're getting false information that's not correct. And it can be really frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that book *Sapiens* that came out several years ago. I mean, at the end of the day, like humanity's just driven by stories, right?
Yeah.
Um, and humans have competed over millennia based on stories. And you and I may have different stories, and that's it's uh, it's weird. It's almost like we're hardwired for this, right?
Oh yeah, we are. We
So
are. I mean, if you look at how the brain processes information, it's trying to make these connections, right? It's trying to fashion, and then sometimes it'll have, but wait a second, I don't believe in this, and so I have this worldview, and then how do I make these facts that I now have work? And so that's why we have, I believe that's why we have conspiracy theories, because it's like this, this is the narrative that I want to have, and so I have to, I have to accept these crazy kind of assumptions that are going on to kind of make it work with my worldview. And so, it's interesting. It's all about narratives. It's all about how we think, and that's why data storytelling is so important, because if we can, here's the thing: if I just provide you the data, you're going to form your own narrative around those data points. If I come to you with the data points encased in a data story that's plausible and understandable, then there's a good chance you're going to accept that narrative with the data points. And so we can either take control of the destiny of our insight by building the story around that insight, or we can just give people the insight and hope and pray that they will come and fashion the same narrative. And I would say that's risky, because I think a lot of people, because of whatever reason, they're going to form a slightly different narrative and may even not accept your narrative. And people maybe on the data side may get kind of feel like, wait a second, that's manipulation. That's, it's not manipulation, it's persuasion. We want people to understand the information and provide them with the direction and the full understanding of it, interpret it the right way so that they can make good decisions.
I mean, how do you reconcile that with, if we take a highly political organization, for example, where you may have competing departments, sort of a microcosm of today's society. So two competing departments, and they might each be making their own reports. I mean, how does the CEO of that company deal with a situation like that, where they might be getting competing information?
Yeah, I think that's where you're just going to have to ask good questions. Where did you get that number? And understand the bias that, and people say, oh, I don't want to be biased. Well, we're all biased. We're biased from the beginning of even what we choose to analyze, because we're making a decision. I don't want to look at this. I don't want to look at that. I want to look here. And so our bias is a part of everything we do, even in the models that we build, right? What we choose to train on. And so everything, there's no objectivity. So I think, as an executive, you'd have to be mindful of that. Okay, what is the bias of this department and the data that they shared? What's the bias of the department and they're sharing? And then, ask those questions, being, critical, having a critical eye to what is being shared and what is being presented. And, ultimately, it's kind of, you hold people accountable to their numbers. If people are fudging numbers or making up stuff or misrepresenting the numbers, then there should be some accountability for that. But I think, I've been in several situations where, executives are asking hard questions, and sometimes myself or others, we're prepared. We have the answers, so we can back up what our claims are. And then other times, maybe people can't back up their, and they get caught. Like, you've rotated on this one number here, and you have nothing to back it up with. And then, and that's, if you think about Aristotle, and he had these persuasive appeals, and one of them is ethos, right? And that's the credibility that we have as a presenter. And so I talk about that in my book. We want to make sure that we're not trying to manipulate the numbers. We're not trying to, massage the data so that it fits a certain narrative that we want to tell. Because then ultimately, if we get caught doing that, we're going to lose credibility. And so that means with our audience, the next time we come with a data story, they're going to be skeptical. They're not going to trust us as much. And so I think it's a duty as a data storyteller, if we want to be sharing insights over time and want people to act and get value on what we're sharing. It's a responsibility that we have to make sure that we're striving to be credible with what we're presenting, and make sure that we're not trying to deceive anybody. Yeah, we can make mistakes. And if I made a mistake with how I analyze something, or I didn't include a data set that I should have, or whatever, I'll admit it and say, you know what, that's an excellent point. I should have looked at that. Let me come back and bring you, a more complete analysis. And so I think that's a duty or responsibility that data storytellers have.
Yeah, it seems like reputation's everything. I mean, my experience is the data team that has the trust of the company, that company's willing to forgive mistakes in the data or analysis. If you lose a shred of credibility, you can pretty much call it game over. So I don't know what your experience is on that, but it seems kind of a truism in life, really. So.
Yeah. I mean, trust is a big part, and executives they want to work with people they trust, and if your team is viewed as sloppy or not no attention to detail, or if it's mistake driven, or if it's agenda driven where you've manipulated the data to get more funding or more resources, and you've been hiding some things and you get caught, that's hard. So I always take the high road. I recommend taking, let the numbers, use them in the way that they're intended, without distorting their meaning, and try and build that reputation, because I think that'll take you further within an organization than maybe a one-time gamble that pays off and now you're rolling the dice every time you present. No, I think it's building a foundation of credibility that people, they're going to trust you and they're going to come to you for future insights. So
awesome. Well, I think that coming up on time here, what is the best way for people to find out more about you?
Yeah, so they could go to if you want to learn more about my book, Effective Data Storytelling, you can go to effectivedatastorytelling.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter at Analytics Hero. And I love to connect with people who are like-minded in terms of data storytelling and building a data culture at organizations. I think it's exciting to be able to do this, and love the combination of data, narrative, and visuals coming together. So yeah, I found my sweet spot in the analytics industry, and I'm happy to help others with their getting up to speed and becoming better data storytellers.
That's so awesome. And are you teaching your class this coming semester at the U?
No, I'll probably do it again in the fall, and okay. So it'll be good. I probably need a little break to kind of recharge the batteries, and I look forward to teaching the class again in the fall.
So if you're at the University of Utah, sign up for his class.
Right.
So, and my class too. So,
yeah.
Cool. All right, Brent, it's been awesome. So thanks a ton, and
thanks,
we'll
Joe.
see you back. All right, take care.
All right, take care.